We move on to our second presentation this evening. Rio Button is going to be telling us about seahorses and citizen science, or citizen scientists, should I say. Rio studied for a master's in science, an MSc in conservation biology at the University of Cape Town. She's also worked as a research assistant for the Biodiversity Development Institute, where she's been involved in monitoring black oyster catcher nests and nesting success on Robben Island. Very pleased to hear that the paper that is been written up on this research and monitoring has been accepted for publication, so we look forward to seeing that. Rio is currently staying at lives in Knysna, down in the garden route of South Africa, and she's involved in popularizing science and conservation issues and writes for various media. And one of her recent projects that she has been involved in relates to saving the diminutive Knysna seahorse at an estuary near Sedgefield along South Africa's popular garden route. I'm not going to steal your thunder anymore, Rio. Over to you, and we look forward to hearing about your story. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. So seahorses live in the sea, right? Well, that's true for all species but one, which citizen science helped to protect. My name is Rio Button, and with support from roving reporters in the Earth Journalism Network, I recently published an article in the Daily Maverick on seahorse strandings in Swartvlei, which is just over the road from where I live. So at 3:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the 25th of May this year, after many months of watching and waiting, the big excavator rumbled into life, gouging the last bit of sand that separated Swartvlei estuary from the sea. Sandparks had dug a preparatory channel months before. You can see it here, and this reduced the time it took them to open the mouth from 10 hours to just 45 minutes. Here you can see the whole Swartvlei system and where it is in relation to Buffels Bay and well-known Knysna, George, Platte, Mossel Bay. Yeah, just where we're situated on the south coast of South Africa. So here again is your preparatory channel, and here's what it looks like the morning they opened to the sea. I had interviewed the sandpark scientist responsible for seahorses the previous day, and he assured me that it would only be open in a couple of weeks, but the next morning on my morning run, I went down and it was very much open and flowing. So why did they open it? They opened it because the level of the water in the sea, in the estuary, had reached above mean annual, 2 meters above mean annual sea level. And as every Sedgefield resident will tell you, it's been in place for several decades that when the water level in the estuary reaches this height, it gets breached artificially by the authorities. So this year it got breached 1 centimeter shy of 2 meters, but this decision was made because the ocean conditions were perfect. It was a really calm sea and an outgoing spring tide. And the reason these conditions are preferred is because it results in maximum sediment removal from the bottom of the estuary. So when the estuary is closed, lots of sediment accumulates on the estuary floor, and then when it's artificially opened, only a little bit of that sediment is removed, whereas if it was naturally opened from like a massive amount of water moving downstream, more of that sediment would be removed. So this is a big problem. Artificially opening the estuary is a big problem because it makes the estuary shallower over time, and this means that it's more prone to flooding. And the whole reason we're artificially breaching the estuary in the first place is to try to prevent flooding of low-lying property upstream, which has been built on the floodplains. Wasn't really smart to approve that, but now we have lots of developments on the floodplains. The artificial opening, as I said, reduces the flood risk of low-lying property. It also maintains ecological processes and has positive social benefits. I spoke to this wonderful lady, Ellen. She's been fishing here since she was a kid, and now she's 65, so she knows everything about fishing. And she told me that she'd catch more fish and more types of fish now that the mouth is open. So for healthy fish populations, it's really important that the natural functioning of the system is maintained. Just some of the fish species we find in this estuary that are really important both for local fishes, subsistence fishes, but also for tourism in the area is we've got grunter and garrick and black and white seamgrass and Cape stumpnose and also gobbleo and mullet. And these fish come into the estuary to breed because the calm, nutrient-rich conditions of the estuary are very productive. It causes lots of phytoplankton to grow, and this provides food for zooplankton, which provides food for the small fish, but also for big fish and for birds. The opening of the mouth is really important because fish come in to breed, and yeah, that's because this estuary provides really wonderful conditions for small fish. There's lots of food for them in the form of zooplankton and also lots of vegetation that they can hide in. The trouble with the opening of the mouth is that seahorses end up stranded in the shallows as the water level in the estuary drops. Shame. They're not the greatest of swimmers. They've got very small fins, and their upright posture just means they move very, very, very slowly. What they do is they coil their little tails around aquatic plants, and they're often left stranded with their tails still coiled around the plants. Seahorses are really incredible little creatures. They've got prehensile tails like monkeys that they use to hold and grasp onto things. They've got eyes that move independently like chameleons, and they use them to track their zooplankton prey before slurping them up with their straw-like mouths. And then they have a pouch like a kangaroo. Many people think that seahorses are super dads because they carry the eggs around in their pouch and look after them until they hatch. But many species of seahorses have been known to eat their own babies, so maybe they're not such great dads after all. Though in their defense, they usually don't start feeding until several hours after their babies have emerged to reduce the risk of them slurping up their own offspring. And the seahorses that we have here are really special. They're called Knysna seahorses, and they're endangered. Their Greek name, their scientific name, Hippocampus capensis, translates to horse sea monsters from the Cape. And they should really be called estuary horses because this little species of seahorse is only found in estuaries. It is the only species of seahorse exclusively found in estuaries, and it's only found in 3 estuaries on our South Cape coast, and that's Knysna estuary, obviously, Swartvlei estuary that borders Sedgefield, and also Kierboom's estuary in Flat. And these estuaries are all within a 70-kilometer stretch, so their range is really, really small. But what I discovered from interviewing sandparks officials is that these seahorse strandings are part of the natural system for Swartvlei. So there would actually be more seahorses that ended up stranding if the estuary system was left to breach naturally. So if it breached naturally, the water level would drop by 3 meters because this is about the height of the natural sandbank that forms between the sea and the estuary. But because it's artificially breached, they breach the estuary when it reaches 2 meters. So they break down the sandbank. So the drop in water level is less because it's a managed system, and so less seahorses actually get stranded. What's the impact of opening the mouth on seahorse populations? Well, because seahorses are kings of camouflage, we don't really know. Knysna seahorses are incredibly difficult to find. We're really not 100% sure how big their population is. Our best estimates come from a study done in 2003, where they estimated that there were about 200,000 seahorses throughout the 3 systems where they live. But sandparks officials explained that this was probably an overestimation because the study thought that the range of the seahorses within the Swartvlei estuary was greater. Sandparks is working really hard to track seahorse populations in the Swartvlei system. They're using underwater cameras, nets, as well as snorkeling and scuba diving surveys. This photo is a photo I took of myself after 3 days of searching for seahorses, helping sandparks with scuba sampling. And this was the only seahorse we found. We found it on the last day. The only seahorse we found on the transects. We found a few more after that, but not on the transect searches, which were areas sandparks had identified as having high seahorse counts previously. So we think that their populations fluctuate drastically. We're not sure if this is natural or anthrogenically induced. Another important part of trying to understand seahorse populations in the Swartvlei system is the Seahorse Citizen Science Program. The Seahorse Citizen Science Program was very active in the early 2000s, but then seahorse stranding numbers declined and the program sort of withered away. But in 2017, sandparks officials thought that there were going to be high stranding numbers because they'd been observing lots of seahorses. So they rallied citizen scientists together again. And it's a really good thing they did, because that year they had the highest seahorse stranding numbers. They had over 1,000 seahorses stranding. The Seahorse Citizen Science Program is really, really effective. They have over 200 Seahorse citizen scientists. And if you're keen, if you live in the area, or if you're willing to travel and you want to register as a Seahorse Citizen scientist with sandparks, you can email your name and ID number and the general area in which you live to Clement Ardrens at sandparks.org. And it's really important that if you do want to help and handle seahorses, that you register with the program. First of all, Knysna seahorses are endangered, just like our black rhino, and it is illegal to handle them without a specific permit. If you register as a citizen scientist, Seahorse citizen scientist, when you arrive, you will be handed a permit with your name and ID number, and it specifies very specifically that for that day you will be allowed to collect seahorses in the seagrass and return them to deeper water. They do a really good job of controlling this, which is really important because seahorses are obviously unique and lots of people want them in their aquariums, and they're also in demand for traditional Chinese medicine. Another reason, the main reason, in my opinion, why it's really important to register with the program and not to just go out and try to do it yourself is because the information collected about where the seahorses strand, how many strand and how many survive is then collected by sandparks through the program. And that's really important for species management going forward. So yeah, thanks. This year, we're not 100 sandparks, won't tell me how many seahorses we rescued, but my little team of Seahorse citizen scientists, we came up with 9, and they all managed to survive, which was really, really great to see. And then, yeah, just a big thank you to roving reporters and the Earth Journalism Network with their support in getting this article published, and sandparks for answering nearly all of my questions really quickly. Sandparks is doing a really great job in this area. It's really great to see. All the residents I spoke to were really, really happy with sandparks and what they were doing. So that was really great. And yeah, thanks for having me this evening. You can follow more of my work by following my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Biologist Button. If you'd like to get hold of me, my email is there. As Rick mentioned, tomorrow morning on SABC3, there'll be a little piece on seahorses, and I'll be chatting to the hosts of that, which will be really fun. And yeah, if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you, Rio. Thanks very much for enlightening us about the Knysna seahorses in the Swartvlei Lagoon estuary. I think that's great. There was a question about the change in salinity with the breaching of the estuary. Are there changes in salinity, and does this have an effect, or I'm presuming there's an outflow and an inflow? So
Yeah,
how do the seahorses deal with this?
So seahorses, these Knysna seahorses are very resilient to salinity. They can tolerate, normal ocean salinity all the way down to 1 part per thousand salinity. So that's really 1 part per thousand of salinity. So that's really a tiny bit of salt. They're very adaptable. But yeah, we do have the salinity does increase when the mouth is opened.
Yeah, there's Itaza just put in a question from Facebook from Vilma Swanepoel. Do they know if artificially opening the mouth is sustainable in future, or would it reach a point where it has affected the estuary beyond repair?
Yeah, Sandparks would probably tell you that it's okay. But even though they breached the estuary less than a month ago, it's already closed and it's filling up again. I think they're just trying to make the best of a bad situation. They can't get rid of all the low-lying developments. I do think the sedimentation is going to be a problem, but they are trying their best to breach it in the most ideal conditions to result in maximum scouring, which is the removal of the sediment from the bottom. But yeah, this is a problem. This is a problem globally in managed estuaries, and there's a lot of literature from South Africa and Australia that basically says if a system can't be left to function naturally, breaching it is the best form of management.
I should imagine with the added sediment, it's also a problem for the seahorses. That increased sediment load.
Yeah, it means the shallower the estuary, also means that the shallower it is, the less habitat they have that won't become exposed. The major threats to Knysna seahorses are critical habitat loss from urban expansion, and then also pollution. But yeah, there's a lot of gabions being put on the sides of especially the Kibroom estuary, and we refer to this as hardening, which in the short term is really bad because it obviously covers and takes away habitat. But we do find a lot of seahorses hanging out on the gabions, and that's why that sampling that I did back in 2018, we only found 1 seahorse on the transects, but we found another 5 or 6 on the gabions. So they're also creating habitat for the seahorses, we think, but it's kind of difficult to tell because they're just really difficult to find.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. One from Mark Liptrot here. Which fish breed in estuaries? I thought that estuaries were used as nurseries, apart from seahorses.
Oh, you've got me. I know that juvenile fish come in. They come into spawn, don't they? I will double check that quickly. Is there anything else while I frantically Google?
Just quickly, what I asked, I was interested in.
Thank you.
Is it likely that there are other populations of non-marine or even freshwater seahorses around the world waiting to be discovered? What would you think?
Yes. So, in publishing this article, I've heard from 2 people. 2 people have reached out to me that have mentioned that there's another estuary further south, Demont Estuary, where there are farmers have said they have found seahorses that are smaller than the Knysna seahorses, but this hasn't been confirmed. And I've heard whisperings, they're very unconcerned. I literally heard this yesterday, that Cape Nature had done some sampling for seahorses there, but hadn't found anything. So maybe there's another species. of purely estuarine seahorses, but yeah, in South Africa, as far as we know for definite, there's been 5 species of seahorses recorded, possibly 8, but Knysna seahorses are definitely the only confirmed endemic and the most common, even though they're endangered and very rare. There's another seahorse called the yellow seahorse, which is genetically very similar to the Knysna seahorse, but it grows to 30 centimeters, and the Knysna seahorse only grows to a maximum of 12 centimeters. And yeah, these yellow seahorses are only found in the sea.
Great, thanks very much. Rio, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did. I just double checked. They do breed in estuaries. Learfish, white sternbrass, cape, stump nose, dusky cob, mullet, white sternbrass, and a whole bunch more, but those are just the really common ones that people like to fish, do breed in estuaries and are dependent on estuaries for breeding. I can give you the name of the.
There you are, Mark. Mark Liptrotch answers to your questions.
Yeah, the African
Great.
Journal of Marine Science has a paper on it.
Oh, good.
So,
Thanks,
yeah.
Rio.
Sorry,
Thanks
I didn't know that.
for checking up on that. Wonderful.